Recording in progress.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Chair Eagleson Chesowich,
Present.
Vice Chair Roman,
Present.
Board Member Pease,
Present.
Board Member Ulinskis,
Present.
Board Member Willis. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any agenda changes?
No changes.
Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda?
I have no request to speak.
Okay, let's move into the schedule and staff report.
Well, good morning. This is our first meeting of 2025, so welcome. Bear with me while I share my screen. All right, so we are in the first meeting of 2025, and we have subsequent meetings listed here on the screen for the remainder of the year. If there are any planned absences, please direct that to either my attention or Veronica's attention. We do have some other announcements. We have a new council liaison. Councilmember Liu is in attendance with us today, so I'd like to give the floor to him if he has any comments or just a warm welcome introduction.
Thank you. I am George Liu, recently elected council member and liaison for the coming year. I'm really excited to work with everyone. Please let me know if I can support anything from residents to council to staff, really anything that can help you. Yeah, I'm just here to serve y'all and excited to learn more.
Thank you. We're so happy you're here.
Great. So moving right along, city staff did attend a community meeting with local historical organizational groups, and we'll provide a little bit more information on that later on the study session item for some of that collaboration efforts. I did want to make an announcement as well that the 2025 California Preservation Conference is coming up. That is in Sacramento, and that is May 6th through May 10th.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
Is that something that our city training budget would be able to support our participation in?
I can look into that and see what available budget that we have. So
I get their emails and I've been looking, they haven't released the agenda yet, but they were supposed to in January. So looks interesting.
all right. Are there any further questions? All right. That concludes my report.
All right. Well, so the first item on the agenda is our work plan,
All right. So
the annual report.
the annual report. That would have been a
No, work plan is next.
yes.
Sorry about that.
All right. So the certified local government annual report. Just a little bit of a background. This was detailed in the staff report, but the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 with subsequent amendments in 1980 established the Certified Local Government Program. And this just encourages direct participation of local governments in preservation efforts. Palo Alto has been a member of this Certified Local Government since February 11th of 1992. And the current reporting period for this annual report is from October 2023 to September of 2024. And the deadline to submit the attached report is March 28th, 2025. And just a little bit of details. There were 13 meetings in the reporting period. There were 8 members who had served during that period, and that accounted for some transitioning as well as the next bullet point, which is the board was reduced from 7 to 5 members with those subsequent amendments to the municipal code, as well as reducing the requirements of the composition of the board to minimally meet the state requirements of the Certified Local Government Program. If there are any additional trainings that were not identified in that report, please direct that to my attention and I can make those subsequent amendments. And with that, I can entertain any questions that the board may have about the attached report. And I do want to note that it is detailed in the report that, submitting this timely offers the city the eligibility to apply for grant funding. We do have on file from 2017 a mid-century context statement that has been tabled, if you will, that could potentially be resurfaced if there's further solicitation or interest. That would need some staff participation as well as involvement of the board. So just food for thought.
Is there any public comment on the CLG report?
No, I have no raised hands or speaker cards.
Okay, so is there board discussion?
I have a couple things that are related loosely to the CLG report. A couple weeks ago, board member Willis and I met with Gogo Heinrich and David Bauer, and David Bauer affirmed or iterated the importance of the CLG, of being a CLG. And so I looked into it a little bit, and I don't have the stats right off the top of my head, but there are not every community in California is a certified local government. And it's really important that we are. Other communities look to the Historic Resources Board as an exemplar of historic preservation within the state. And it also reaffirms the trickle down of state standards for historic preservation. So if there was any doubt as to the work that we're doing here, it is important and it is being translated back up to the state and then to the national level. So I kind of wish I had realized the importance of being a CLG when we did the inventory report, because that reaffirms how important our designations and our recommendations to council are. But I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that, because I've been on this board for 2 years and it's not written such unless you kind of look at that. And it is very important.
Yeah.
I have one question. I noticed in the report that it said it's a requirement that all commissioners and staff of the commission attend at least one training program. And is that training program being scheduled for the board members?
So that is at the discretion of the state to determine the eligibility of a required program training. Typically, staff, historically, how we've administered this is that board members have conducted their training on their own. Staff has had, some capacity and budget to provide some assistance with either trainings that may come at a cost, and those are reported back and detailed in the report. With you being a new member and not serving in the reporting period, but being elected, it's listed on the trainings that there was no training for you. So just clarification on that.
And I will add as well that, as you saw in the city officials report earlier, when we are aware of conferences or other trainings, we will share that with you so that you are aware if you're interested in those. But there are also online trainings, things that can be done at minimal or no cost. There's a variety of options available.
And do board members need to submit documentation of their trainings?
So how we've typically administered this is that either there's email correspondence, whether it's a certificate of attendance of a training or a receipt of paying for a training, things of those nature can be directed to staff for certification of the said training.
Other comments? Yeah.
On packet page 13, at the very bottom where it talks about Planning staff may review and approve minor exterior alterations pursuant to guidelines which the HRB may adopt. And as far as I'm aware, we have not adopted those guidelines, and I think that's critical that we do.
Is there information about these guidelines or where the
So,
status is?
I believe the section that you're referring to is detailing whether the board as well as staff is involved in the reviews of any alterations to structures or historic resources. So currently how our municipal code is structured is that it is 3 hearing bodies, if you will, or review bodies, which would be the ARB for the commercial and multifamily, which can direct their review to the Historic Resources Board. Historic Resources Board would capture any of the reviews for single-family residences, and staff level review would be capturing any minor alteration that would be determined, say, by the director. So maybe a swapping of a window out. And what you're mentioning about the design objective standards, excuse me, would not, we have yet to create any of those.
So just to be clear, I'm going to read the whole sentence. Planning staff may review and approve minor exterior alterations pursuant to guidelines which the HRB may adopt. And as far as I know, we have not adopted those guidelines. I could be wrong. Maybe it happened long before my time, but if we do have those guidelines, I would like to see them.
Staff can add further clarifying language to that report to have it pursuant to the municipal code to clarify that that confusion that is about the objective design guidelines.
So for instance, there's a property that board member Willis and I were going back and forth about and trying to figure out why this specific property had not come to the HRB for review. And the property is 1021 Forest, which we previously actually had a presentation from the architect and the owner. But I believe that was separate. That wasn't required. They just came to us of their own will. I'm not sure. But I think the reason that we haven't seen, even though the property is on the inventory, the reason that we haven't seen the proposed alterations come to us is because it's outside of the downtown area and it because of its category status. And so are those the requirements that you're talking about in the code based on the location and category?
So yes, I think that starts to begin to answer that question. So there's the review of the board would capture either the downtown area, category 1 or 2 resources, category 3 and 4 resources or contributor structures, if you will, are not captured under the review of the board or subject to HRB review. If we're also talking about, say, some of our historic districts, those structures are subject to review of the board, and that captures all structures within those districts. Now, there are some instances going back to that section of the review bodies where if it's simply a re-roof or like-for-like material, that would not be brought before the board. That could be, administered at the staff level.
I do think it would be good to have it in writing so that when somebody asks us about something and we aren't aware of it at all, at least we can say, it's a category 3 or 4, then this, I just think, and that actually, I think that is pretty clear that we're not reviewing those, but, more minor, major, just to have sort of a general outline, and maybe we want to push back against some of those, maybe there's some that planning would consider minor and we don't consider minor. So I just think it would be nice to have it, what is a board review in a paragraph or a page.
For the CLG report, are there any other, I understand that there may be some edits to the wording on what is packet page 13 for us. Are there any other areas that board members would like, to discuss? Or are we prepared to receive the report, as amended? All set? Okay. And we don't need to vote, right? My understanding from the packet is
No,
we do not need to vote.
and that was detailed in the staff
Yes.
report. It's just that the board receives the report.
Okay. Good. Okay. That being said, we're ready to move on. So our next agenda item is the HRB awards and HRB work plan implementation.
All right, so moving right along, work plan preparation. So each spring, the boards and commissions with the city prepare their work plans for the next fiscal year. So this would be from July 1st to June 30th. And as detailed in the current work plan, we do try to capture some of the prior year accomplishments in a summary in that section on the work plan, just detailing the HRB's progress on its goals from the prior year. So staff did realize that there was little opportunities or instances where we've kind of come back with status updates. So we just wanted to provide that here today of those 5 work plan goals and just show a little bit of tracking of how we're where we're at in the process, if you will. So for the structure here, I do know that the staff report also has under this this study session the HRB awards, which ties into goal 5. So I was just going to go through each of the goals and with 5 and then start that conversation with that. And I also am aware there is an ad hoc committee report out regarding number 5 and some of the collaboration with the historical group. So we'll have that follow the staff's presentation. So with the wayfinding out of the way, we'll jump right into it. Starting with work plan goal number 1. This is to provide some limited modifications to the municipal code chapter for the historic preservation ordinance and clarifying some of the roles that the HRB may have. This is, subject to council direction as detailed in the column of council directed policy update and resources needed. So it is anticipated that at some point in 2025, council may direct staff to conduct a comprehensive update to the municipal code, and staff would be recommending some edits to this chapter with that update. So that is that for goal 1. Moving on to goal 2. This is for some education and creating new user-friendly resources regarding the, say, communication to the public on historic preservation. So we have updated some of the web pages so that for the most part satisfies item A of that goal. There is still some work to be had, so we can continue that, as well as we've updated the historic review bulletin, clarifying the role of what would be captured with the board review, and that is satisfying item C. And we're continuing to work on item B, which item B is to improve communication with the use of either videos or city and state web pages and linking those and having property owners understand the local preservation incentives and codes that may apply to their properties. Goal 3 is subject to council direction. So this would be conducting a further survey of the local inventory resources listed prior to the 2023 survey efforts to determine historic conditions. This as detailed in the project goal title, as well as the council directed policy update. This is subject to council direction. We have yet to receive that. And there is some opportunities here that could move forward without council direction, such as just cleaning up the list of adding those 21 structures that were designated from that 2023 survey efforts, as well as removing some demolished structures that may have not been represented in the holistic review of that. inventory list. Goal 4. So this is additional preservation incentives. So item A would be considered with the code update that we had just mentioned. And items B and C are also subject to council direction. So those would be further outreach of any of the updates that would occur to the code and outreach to the community to better understand those incentives. So there is some, should I say, in the last reporting period for the CLG, there was a community outreach meeting for some incentives, and that had occurred. So if it's at the will of the board, we could have another community meeting just to kind of detail some of the incentives that we do have. There is some language on the website as well as some further resources detailing the benefits in the municipal code as well as the building code for historic resources and what that might look like to being designated. So we can, continue those efforts to move forward. And finally, landing on goal 5, we are continuing the work on this. So this was recently added to the work plan. And with that, we can jump into the conversation on the award program. So as detailed in the staff report, there are about 5 items to cover regarding this. So that would be detailing the public participation and what level that might look like, the frequency of the awards, selection criteria, the timing of the awards, as well as amending the bylaws just to solidify that in the procedural rules for this board.
Stephen, before we go, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, wait. I was going to ask if we get to comment on the work plan presentation.
Sure.
Actually, is there any public comment on the work plan, or I guess the awards as well, since we're kind of taking them together?
I have no public comment.
Okay, thanks. All right, yeah.
Okay, before we dive into the awards, because I think there will be a lot of discussion, we definitely want feedback on that. I was looking at our work plan for the year, and I noticed conveniently that there are 5 goals, and there are 5 members of this committee. And Caroline and I have been meeting regularly as a subcommittee to work towards forwarding goal 5. And we have done an immense amount of work, which you will see. And we're actually getting things done. And it is due in no small part because we took ownership of that goal. So I would like to propose that in effort of moving the needle forward on each of our 5 work plan goals for the year, we designate an owner for each one of the goals that will be responsible for coming back to this board and reporting out on their progress. And in addition, they are welcome to form a subcommittee. They don't have to do it alone. So that is my proposal.
There discussion of this? I think a few of these were kind of dependent on council to make the first move.
I think that's fine, but I think if we assign an owner to forward the issue with council, that will go far.
I obviously was Samantha. But also I think that there's a lot of work we can do before it goes to council. And actually, I'm not sure. I mean, I was wondering if the survey could mostly be done with volunteers and we wouldn't really need council for that part of it. We certainly would need them to, approve our work at the end. But it seems to me that there's a lot we can do before we actually need support from staff or council. And I'm assuming that because the council approval was those for staff time. Is that true?
Correct, and resources that would need to be allocated.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. To Board Member Willis's point about there being work that can be done in advance, I think another example of that is the municipal code changes that that effort will likely be folded into our comprehensive update to the zoning code and the are sections of the municipal code. But if there were members of this body who wanted to go through and take a look at the relevant sections and put together a list of changes or issues or concerns, that could feed into the subsequent staff and consultant process as a way of moving that forward without requiring staff time or allocation of additional resources from council.
I mean, it sounds like there's room for a couple of subcommittees here.
And I would like to invite board members to express interest in which goal they are interested in owning. But if we don't have interest, we have suggestions.
Can you turn on your microphone?
Oh, sorry. I'm interested in owning goal number 4, but the question I have about that is in exploring incentives, wouldn't that be something that would have to be a dialogue with the planning department as well? And planning would have input on what sort of goals could be, or what sort of incentives could be offered?
So it would be a conversation, any additional incentives to what's currently offered and any of the, say, the municipal code that we have. We did have a recent discussion, at least within this reporting period, of an item going before council of a letter regarding the Mills Act program. So that has historically been tabled, and there's been a considerable amount of work of the board as well as staff time that's been allocated to creating a pilot program. So that could be, a conversation that we continue to have and see, if that's received at the council level. So that would be one item, for an additional preservation incentive that comes to mind. The Mills Act is the premier incentive for historic preservation of properties with a preferential tax code. But this, as detailed in the project and goal, would be, looking at any of the any incentives or outreach to the community that they may have or desire to see on their property. So kind of having that engagement or dialogue, if you will, with the community. So.
And to add to that as well, I think the kind of research and outreach to other communities to see what kinds of incentives they have considered or implemented, that type of research into what other communities are doing and what the options are that are out there, what kinds of grants there are out there, or other programs that might be available. Collecting that kind of information is something that the board members could definitely do to kind of provide information as a background to any future discussions.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So
I am very, oops, sorry. I'm very happy to have Geddes be the point person for goal number 4.
Guess I'm personally most interested in goal 1, the municipal code changes.
would there, following in line with the discussion, be any interest for an owner of goal 2?
I know previously, Christian, you had some interest in. Okay. Sorry to volunteer you that remind you. Wonderful. Looking forward to that.
And then we're left with 3 and 5. And we already have a subcommittee for 5.
We have a subcommittee for 5, and I am happy as I continue to work with PAST and become acquainted with Stephen Steiger and the archives and other groups to own Project 3. and do some footwork and reach out to local groups like the Eagle Scouts who could potentially help with that.
And I'm number 5.
And I would like to participate in the additional preservation incentives in some way.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sounds like a subcommittee has been formed.
Do we formalize the subcommittee or?
For the record, I think that would be great. And we can just go through each of these goals and establish the ad hoc committees for each of those.
Okay. So we've got ad hoc committees for 4 and 5. And then right now 1 through 3 have like kind of point people. If anybody wants to join a subcommittee on 1 through 3, we can do that now, or can we leave it as point person? If the point person's fine.
That's
Okay,
acceptable.
great.
Yes.
Okay. All set?
Thank you, everyone. I'm looking forward to see if this keeps things moving in this new work plan year.
All right, so subcommittee for item 5.
All right. So
Okay, here we are.
now to the meat of the conversation. Let's just go back over to these slides. I did prepare just a few guiding points here. So for participation, we can, discuss how the public can be involved in this process. And that could look like, collaborating with some of the local historical groups. The frequency of the awards, there was a consensus from that last meeting or discussion that we had on this item for a 5-year cycle. That could be brought in conversation again, or we could continue with that 5-year cycle. And it also was discussed at that previous meeting that the selection of awarding the 2025 preservation awards would occur in 2026. And there was a desire not to overlap with the ARB design awards. Just to have this as a separate item because that is occurring in 2025. As for selection criteria, there was a consensus from the previous meeting that considering, only projects that have been reviewed by the HRB, also allowing some flexibility in the criteria for each of the awarding boards to determine what properties or structures or work would be awarded. So that is reflected in the Architecture Review Board in their bylaws to allow, that flexibility of the awarding board, say 5 years down the road, to decide what would be considered an award-winning project. And on this note, there needs to be some direction to staff as to how far back we should consider the first award cycle since we are creating this program, whether we are going to be looking in the past, how far, whether that's a 10-year, 20-year cycle, 5-year, any of those items need to be established. Timing, it could be considered aligning with the National Preservation Month in May. That would be ideal. And also with that, we can have a request of council to issue a proclamation for these awarded projects with displays in City Hall lobby. And that aligns with the process that we have with the Architectural Review Board Design Awards. And further collaboration with local historical groups, either for any events or outreach for the said award ceremony. And lastly, staff can come back at a future meeting with amended language for the HRB bylaws just to solidify this process and the procedural rules. And there is some draft language here from the design awards for the Architectural Review Board, and there are 3 sections. And with that, we can turn it over to the ad hoc committee for their discussion.
Do you want to start?
I think Veronica is going to present our slides, I believe. But yeah, I'm happy to. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I did go back and read the meeting minutes from our last meeting where there were some consensus on items as Stephen has outlined for us. We would like to open some of those up for discussion again, based on the conversations and findings that the subcommittee has had. So I'll preface this presentation with that. Next slide, please, Veronica. So the HRB Preservation Awards proposal, and I am just going to read this. Palo Alto is a special place. People from across California, the US, and the world seek out Palo Alto for its opportunity, community, and beauty. Lending charm to our city are historic buildings and homes. These properties give Palo Alto a defining sense of place. Palo Alto retains historic charm due, in part, to the work of a small but dedicated group of preservation leaders within the community. In alignment with HRB Work Plan Goal number 5, the HRB seeks to award long-term preservation leaders in Palo Alto. The first iteration of the Preserving Palo Alto Awards, named to be confirmed, will be awarded in 2025 and to be confirmed years thereafter. This is one of the many steps the HRB has taken in collaborating with Palo Alto Stanford Heritage to build a preservation positive Palo Alto, encouraging historic preservation, education, and awareness. The Preserving Palo Alto Awards seek to recognize people, projects, and properties leading the way in preserving Palo Alto's unique character for future generations. So what you'll see here is that we have given a working name to the awards, Preserving Palo Alto, that is up for discussion, and we have some examples on later slides, which we can talk through. You'll also see that we are proposing actually starting these awards this May. And we propose that we begin the awards by recognizing those who have been leaders in preserving Palo Alto, leaders in preservation of Palo Alto versus actual properties. I think in later iterations, our proposal is that the HRB will recognize people, projects, and properties that come to the HRB with these awards. But for now, we think there is sufficient reason to start the awards this year versus in 2026 or in 5 years. We can speak to that and to recognize some specific leaders in Palo Alto. Next slide. So we would like to discuss the program proposal, as I just outlined. We are proposing that we award projects and properties regardless of whether they have come to the HRB, because we are just not seeing a lot of projects come to the HRB for reasons we have previously discussed in this meeting. We would like to discuss the timing, 2 versus 5 years, and the pros and cons. We would also like to discuss coupling or decoupling the awards with the ARB awards. And then we have some proposed names. And then, so we can take these, or I can tell you our proposal for the award winners for this year. Where would the chair like to go first? Or where, Caroline, would you like to add?
Caroline would like to talk about these first. We are interested in what you guys, I mean, obviously, we're detouring from where we last were, and we think there's some advantage to jumping right in. I like the 2025, 5 years, easy to remember. And there is some discussion of whether we should do it every 2. So, you know, that might put me into the even years if that's the way you guys are going. But I think 2025, and not necessarily doing it in a joint effort with the ARB. I think having our own standalone. We're negotiating venues. It would be nice to have a budget. It's a little challenging. We're really hoping we can negotiate with History Museum to do it there. I just think it would be a lovely celebration for us, for them. But, you know, I guess all our preservation groups that we met with are feeling the same way. So the Stanford Historic Society is going to celebrate, part of their celebration of their 75 years, I think. It's going to be at the museum. And obviously the museum is going to do their own celebration. So I think we're waiting to see how that comes together. But there are other historic properties in town that I think might be good venues for us. what else was I going to talk about? Oh, so we are working closely with PAST. They questioned whether we wanted to do joint awards every 5 years or every 2 years. But I think that would be, I think it's better to have city awards separate from the PAST awards. And also, I think we need to see where our program is going, that Samantha and I sort of see this first year honoring these people who really, whose shoulders we're building on, that's a really good start for us as a board, and it reflects our beginnings. I hope you guys will let us know what you're thinking. And if you have better ideas, we're certainly open to them.
If there's more to the presentation, let's continue
Okay.
with it and then we can discuss afterwards.
Okay, excellent. Next slide, please, Veronica. Wonderful. And there has actually been some updates to this recently, so I will speak to those. They are not necessarily reflected in the slides. But for our 2025 first iteration of these awards, we propose, as I said, rewarding leaders in preservation in the community. And those leaders would be Carolyn George, Gail Woolley, and Steve Steiger. And we received a fourth nomination of an individual from PAST last night at their meeting. We are no longer considering Thwaites or the Palo Alto Museum, as there was some discussion about it with PAST last night, and we believe the Palo Alto Museum will be doing their own awards or some kind of recognition of those who have worked diligently to bring the museum to fruition. Next slide. We are proposing recognizing these individuals this coming May. As Caroline spoke to, we have some leads and ideas of where we could do a small awards reception. We, of course, would invite all of the members of the associated boards in Palo Alto, PAHA, PAST, and Stanford Historical Society. We believe that because we are nominating individuals, we can do this fairly quickly and get this going by May. So that's our proposal on timeline and an actual award ceremony. We do not recommend doing the award ceremony at City Hall. We are interested in using a historic venue in Palo Alto. What? Oh, good. Well, a different historic venue in Palo Alto. Any additions to that one, Caroline? No? Okay, next slide. And these are just some examples of historic preservation award plaques that we would like to present to those who we recognize this year. So this is a beautiful example from New York State. Next slide. And then there are some other examples of preservation awards that have been presented. And that is it. I will open it for discussion, feedback.
So I'm happy to go first, but if anybody has like burning comments, we can go there. Oh, okay. So I have some initial thoughts. One, I would really prefer to not like kind of batch the awards with the ARB. I think it adds to the distinctiveness of like the two groups to have them done separately. If it involves, showcasing projects in the lobby, I think it also just, like relieves a little bit of density out there so that the projects get a bit more visibility. So I would sort of, my preference would be to do them independently of each other.
Can I ask a question, a clarifying question? I agree with decoupling from the ARB awards. Do you mean years wise or programmatically wise or real estate wise?
So if it's in the same year in different months, I don't really care. Like that's sure. Yeah, it's just that like I would really like want them I think visually separated in terms of event and separated in terms of content. But if it falls in the same calendar year, to me, that doesn't seem like a huge deal. The other reaction I had is I actually am not tremendously enthusiastic about recognizing individuals. I think as a board, we look at projects and we look at architecture and we make recommendations about projects and architecture, not about people. And so I think it strays a little bit from the core of our mission, as important as it is to recognize people who are working in this area. I think past may be a more appropriate entity for that recognition, with certainly our, support or attendance, but to me, it seems a bit more outside of the scope of what we typically address.
I just want to address Alyssa's comments. The three people we picked, Gail Woolley was very active with the Square House. She was what I consider the mother of preservation in Palo Alto. We wouldn't be here today, I suspect, without her. She was very active, and when she was working on the Square House, when she was mayor of Palo Alto, and when she formed Past Heritage or helped to form Past Heritage. Likewise, Carolyn George was on the second HRB, and I think all these people we pick for their durability, not because they were great for a year or two, but because they really latched on to preservation in Palo Alto, and really made an effort for us to continue it. So Carolyn George was on an early HRB. She chaired the HRB. If you look some of these sheets, you can see her signing her name to them. And she also has been the one who has maintained Past website that we were all admit we are heavily dependent upon. So I think she is definitely within our purview. And then the third one is Steve Steiger, who's our historian, who sits on, when we had our meeting with the other historic groups, I think Steve is on the board of 4 of them. He is really the glue that holds us together and communicates between us and maintains the archives and encourages people to look for information on their old houses. So I think in honoring our forebears, it's a really good way to start these awards. And otherwise, I think getting it together even within the year would be a real challenge, because I think we have some serious decisions to make if we're looking at HRB projects. And the other thing I'd like to speak to is not just projects done by the HRB. I understand that that's who we are, but our mission, I think, is deeper. And for us, at least for me, preserving Palo Alto is my mission. And I think that a lot of these projects we don't see are the best preservation projects because they are not adding on. They're not, building an ADU on top of the house. They're not subdividing. Unfortunately, the projects we see are the projects that are not the best in preservation. So I think that not to exclusively do projects that we don't see, but I think we would do ourselves some injustice if we only saw projects we see. And I understand that's up for discussion, but I feel really strongly about that.
If there's really a parent of preservation in Palo Alto, a mother, why not name the award after that individual? At least consider it. I also agree that it should not be constrained to projects that come here.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Based on what I've seen during my time on the board, the projects that are coming through us skew pretty heavily commercial. And so if we want to acknowledge residential projects, we may have to look beyond what's coming in front of us. The other thing too, I just kind of, to go back to like the people or architecture, that, it looks like going forward, most of our, awards are going to be focused on the architecture. And I do think it would be a little bit strange to kick it off with an award that doesn't really mesh with like the intended recipients of the program going forward. I guess I do feel that a little more consistency there would be helpful. Although like acknowledging folks who've done, good work in preservation and other ways, like you suggest that, that may work. Yeah.
So I did have a question about if we are awarding architecture, is it sort of a preservation award that will be given to all sorts of different projects, or would we have it like different categories?
So that is our initial proposal for right now is people, projects, and properties with the discretion every 2 or 5 years, depending on when we decide these will be done, to create categories ad hoc. The ARB creates categories for their awards each year, is my understanding, based on the projects that they see.
And I can add a little bit of further context on that. So we are in discussion with the ARB with establishing, or if you will, determining which projects are award winning. So that has gone through 4 separate hearings. There was a list of close to 100 projects, and subsequent hearings dwindled that down. And hopefully next week we have the final iteration of that discussion and selecting those award-winning projects. So there was discussion, at least for this award board, that there would be 5 awards established and awarded out to projects. So it was a considerable amount of work to go through all of those hearings, figure out which projects had been completed versus which had actually come before the board. So there is quite a bit of staff as well as time from board members to do the research behind those items and dwindle down from that list. There was discussion about some honorable mentions or some other types of awards beyond, say, something that would be within, say, the scope of the board's duties of reviewing these projects. So I'm hearing, today in the discussion that there could be a potential of investigating either awarding an individual that may have made, contributions to the community through their work, that could be, considered. It really is at the discretion of the board to figure out what this award program would look like for the city. I do think that keeping in mind with the scope of the board's duties probably would be prudent, and having at least a majority or some whatever that makeup would look like of projects that have come before the board or were involved in, subject to the historic preservation ordinance, kind of those parameters, and then considering some of these other items. And I think board member Peace made a great suggestion of potentially naming some of these awards after these individuals, and having that in place, perhaps, rather than awarding them themselves. So.
I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on the split between residential and commercial in this regard. It's a hard one for me, but.
Can you elaborate? Like, what are
Well,
your thoughts?
Well, I think there's big financial incentives for commercial, and they're much more visible to people. So I would tend to look at the residential more, but and I don't know how you would balance those two things off.
You're right that commercial is more visible, and they're probably more incentivized to have their properties profiled and have their businesses profiled. And actually, I think that's maybe why having categories to show that residential is welcome as well as commercial is good. The other thing is that, I think part of the awards, if I'm not mistaken, is sort of community outreach to let the public in general know that, we're interested in preservation, we're interested in acknowledging preservation and good preservation. That I'm going to give you an example of an award program that my firm recently went for, and they have different categories. And then they have one category, which they call the Reader's Choice Award. And that is an award that people can go online and vote for projects. And so everybody who is nominated for that category does an email blast to every single person they know. So you've got 20, people nominated, sending out hundreds of emails, and people who've never heard of the Red Awards before hear about the Red Awards. So, I mean, it's a gimmick, but again, if our goal is to have this awards program as outreach and raise awareness, then it's sort of things like this that you do.
Love the idea. And I think it is all about engaging with the community, putting preservation out there, making people aware that, I mean, a lot of people come in and demolish our houses have they just don't know anything about Palo Alto. So I think the more we can put out there that Palo Alto does treasure their historic places, the better chance we have of keeping them. And, you can't really blame people that we don't educate for not knowing.
So I think this has been very valuable discussion. I think the maybe not risk, but reality is if we don't feel confident about the proposed awardees this year because they're not in line with the HRB's purview or for other reasons, there will not be, the HRB will not give awards this year. We can look to 2026. We may have to look out to 2030 if we're going on the 5-year cycle. The other thing I want to bring up is that with the 2-year cycle, it is quick. I honestly am not sure if we'll be able to hold to it, but there is continuity of board members if we do a 2-year cycle. So just wanted to state that.
I would also be comfortable like saying, we want to do a 5-year cycle on the 5-year, but for the initial one to just go off cycle for, to do 2026 so that we're, have enough time to do the work we need to do. And then say the next ones are going to be in 2025 and then every 5 years after that. But an initial off-cycle award doesn't bother me. I had another thought about the presentation with, how far back would we look for the initial awards? And I think anything beyond 10 years is just too long. Yeah. It's just sort of not, I think that's just too far back. There may be other opinions about even shorter timeframes, but I think for me, at least, more than 10 years seems like kind of a while.
And just to make sure I'm clear on this, is the idea that there are different categories for each award cycle that are determined in the context of that cycle?
Yeah, I think the idea is if we see a project that we think is really outstanding, we'd be able to recognize them.
Any idea what too many categories is? I mean, I like the idea of a people's choice, if you will, but that could always be there. But just a thought. Seems like, do we want to inundate the community with awards or make them very special? There's 2 or 3 categories.
So for food for thought, when we consulted past about their award categories, they have one for people, lifetime achievement. They have commercial, residential, Stanford, separate category. Am I missing another one, Caroline? I think they do commercial, residential, people, and Stanford, I think.
And I don't think they necessarily do it every cycle, every year.
Would we want to add a multifamily to that, or?
Yes.
I think the first step is that our committee needs to look at the possibilities, because I don't think there are that many, sorry, a little pessimistic here. And come back to you with what the possibilities might be over the last 10-year period. I think that's certainly long enough. And also, if we did extend it to preservation projects that the HRB had not reviewed, what a list of those that you might be able to make a more educated judgment on.
And I assume that would be, likely homes that have engaged in projects that we didn't review that are, subject to the historic preservation ordinance and are on the local register, something like that.
Yes, we could look into those items. So what I'm hearing in the discussion, just a little clarification here on ask of staff, or direction, should I say. So I think one items needed, or next steps, if you will, coming before the HRB with some amended language for the bylaws and getting that solidified for the next hearing, perhaps, as well as perhaps at that next hearing having a running list of either projects that we can pull from a report from Acela. And I'm hearing a 10-year cycle, and we can look back at either building permits for the category 1, 2s, and 3s and 4s. So those structures listed on the inventory, as well as within the historic districts, and dwindle the list down and start the conversation there. So did I miss anything, or is there any friendly amendments to that ask of staff?
My addition would be, as Caroline and I look at categories and propose them, I just want to put it on the record so I remember as well, is adaptive reuse. It is so important in historic preservation. And I think, I know it's controversial. I think we should be recognizing it. And it sounds like I'm also hearing, just to recap, that that there is not support for pushing the awards through this May based on what we have proposed. I just want to clarify.
I don't want to clarify that. I want to do it. I know Alyssa doesn't think it's the right path. Christian, you want to slow me down? But I really think, I think that if you try something, you learn a lot. So I think that the other thing, actually pulling out 10 years worth of projects and reviewing them and picking them, I don't even know if that's a 1-year project. That sounds like a lot. So I would like to see us actually start the program. And I think this is a really appropriate starting at the beginning with the people who kind of got us here. So I would encourage you to buy into Sam and my barge ahead plan. And yes, let's work on awards, but I think that in looking at the projects we've reviewed, we're going to learn a lot more about what kinds of awards, how many different kinds of awards. It's hard to look back at what we've seen the last couple of years because it hasn't been a lot, so I think we need to sort of compile some information and look at it as a body of work so we can kind of see what the possibilities are going ahead. And I would even delay putting the language in the ordinance or drafting the language until we had a clear idea of what our raw materials are, I guess.
Well, I think if you're going to go ahead this year, we ought to not have categories. We ought to just concentrate on one.
Sorry, and have it be
This is
architectural in
yes,
nature.
It's the first time around, and it's a learning experience, and it just seems like it would make it more efficient and more effective.
When you say this year, I want to,
If you're going to do something in May, or
so
that's what I mean.
2025.
Yeah, the initial one. Any thoughts on that, or?
I'm
Like,
going to,
I want to know, so I know Alyssa's against the people thing, but I really think people are, hey, people with preservation. And I think that everybody can relate to another human. Not everybody's going to relate to a building or two. So I think people is a really good category to start us off. And I guess I want to know what Christian and Geddes think.
Well, it sounds like there's a finite number of founders of preservation in Palo Alto. And if you recognize them in this first round, and that sort of kicks off the awards, and then it goes into sort of a more regular, look back on projects, I think that would be a good way to do it, yes.
I think
Christian, are you going to buy in?
we could, I mean, is this appropriate to take a vote on? And the reason I'm asking is because with the May timeline that we have proposed, we are working at a very quick clip. So if there is not support, I would like to know that now so that we don't waste cycles.
I guess I have some follow-up questions about just logistics for May, like outside of like who or what, but like, when we're looking at things like having a plaque or, whatever would need to happen on the city administrative end to do it, or if there's a venue involved in a venue rental, is this realistic?
I think that's a really good point.
So we have already reached out to the museum, and I am awaiting doing further conversations with the museum pending the discussion with this board. It has been indicated, though we don't have it in writing, that we would get that space in kind. There is a concern about their certificate of insurance, which is required for events. At the same time, I know that in 2022, the ARB, it was indicated on a meeting minutes report that the ARB was interested, not sure if they actually had a ceremony, but there was talk of a ceremony, which indicates to me that potentially there was budget from the city. This is another thing that we can also do with little to no budget, asking for in-kind donations of beverages, of food, of the venue rental. It's scrappy. Yeah.
Are we allowed to accept those? I was formerly an employee of the city of San Francisco, and we likely would not have been able to. I don't know what Palo Alto's rules look like.
Yeah, so I think let's address probably the first question that you brought up regarding the logistics of having this. Realistically, I think it's a large ask. It's a very short timeline to get everything gathered together and awarded to the public, outreach, all of anything that would entail for that. I think it's a little bit more of a realistic timeline to establish this program and award and have outreach with the community and make them aware for in 2026. With that said, there could be, some investigation of what was being discussed here today. I do think that would raise some concerns or issues. Perhaps we can confirm about what would be acceptable or what would not be acceptable. As for budget, there is a limited budget for the Architectural Review Board Design Awards, and that is allocated, on a 5-year cycle. So having this being established, we'll need to, confirm with the budget just to see what amount of money is available for any of the, say, creating a proclamation or either framing that or having an actual award created and the cost that might be associated with those items. So I think I'll rest on probably 2026 would be a little bit more of a realistic timeline.
Well, I think the first one ought to be really good. So I would rather not have a quick process that doesn't get much attention.
I suppose for transparency and clarity, am am not worried about the logistics of said award ceremony or event, as this is my day job. And that is my profession. And so I'm very well versed and can put things together very quickly. I think the contingencies on city budget and city bylaws and guidelines of if we can accept said in-kind donations and things like that, and having staff resources to put together a proclamation and the awards themselves is a real timeline that we need to be aware of. So fair point there. So I see it, there are now two issues on the docket. One is their support of the proposed first year awards being awarded to the people of preservation or preservation leaders in Palo Alto. And then secondly, do we do these awards starting this May in Preservation Month in 2025, or do we bump it out to 2026 and then after that do it on the 5-year cycle starting next in 2030? Those are the two items.
I mean, I think my perspective is probably pretty clear at this point. What my preference would be is to, do it really well in 2026, and then move to the 5-year, years ending in 0 and 5 cadence. I think with that longer timeline, we're going to be able to, just have our ducks more in a row, allocate the resources, figure out any, pertinent city issues, associated with whatever event or, items we'd like to give out or that kind of thing. And I think it would also allow us the opportunity to do that first round, in a way that's much more aligned with how we would do subsequent rounds. So there's consistency and we would be able to honor, the projects that, we've seen or seen around town.
My old lady perspective says that if we push it back a year or two, yes, we'll have more time to coordinate with the city and, I don't know, maybe we could do fancier awards, but my brain says we could use a practice. And if we do it, and whether we do it this year, next year, or the year after, I see it's still going to be practice. It's still going to be our first attempt at doing something. So I kind of see it as a good thing that we have a short time frame and we have a good excuse if it's not perfect. So certainly as Samantha and I envision something that's a really lovely community event. I don't think we need fancy, truth, I think we could get, some really minor donations is all we need. And I think that the one thing we would like for the city to do for us is put their seal on the awards. So other than that, I think we can design the awards. I think we can print the awards. I think we can frame the awards. I don't really have a problem with that. And I know it's ambitious and we're kind of pushing the limits here, but I just feel like if we push it back, we're not gonna, I don't know. I don't feel like we're gonna make a lot of progress.
Well, I certainly wouldn't wait 2 years, but I think a year is reasonable.
Perhaps to aid the discussion, we could do a straw poll of the interests of these items.
Yeah. The other thing I just sort of want to mention, and my thinking about awarding to people, particularly an award where we're trying to get a lot of community involvement and participation, to go out with award nominees that we've come up with without really the opportunity for public input. you know, as good as their work may have been, you know, and however instrumental they are to preservation in Palo Alto, we really haven't had an opportunity for community input, and the timeline would not allow, I think, significant community input in the way that we might hope to engage.
I did have that thought as Geddes mentioned the Community Choice Award, and the names that we have come up with have been in concert with past, but perhaps not in concert with Paha and Stanford, and a general consensus of Palo Alto in more broadly.
And have these folks been recipients of past awards, like with past? I imagine a lot of them probably have, because that ends up looking a little like, I don't know, self-referential.
I don't think
Yeah.
Carolyn has, because she's been so active with past, Carolyn George. And I don't remember Gail ever being, but she might have. And I know she's definitely been acknowledged by the city after her term as mayor. So, yes, you know, they have been, you know, well, I don't know. I guess no. They haven't been acknowledged for preservation by past, as to the best of my knowledge. And I guess, lost my train of thought. Never mind.
So in interest of moving this forward and in interest of time, what I am hearing is there is not a consensus from this board on who or what we should be awarding, and that it should be done this May. I think this board appreciates the bias for action, but I also think it's very important that we have the full support of the HRB when doing these awards, so that we can really show up as a unified HRB. There has been enough discord between the community and the HRB. I think it's important that we show up as a unified front. So I'm going to make that statement that it doesn't sound like we have consensus, and thereby I don't feel comfortable moving forward without the consensus of the HRB.
I just want to speak to Alyssa's point a little bit about going out to the community, and we have, in a way, and they've brought us some names, but I feel like what we've held to, like, way up here, you know, people that have really been our bedrock. And I feel really comfortable. I can send you resumes, and actually, I have a lot on Gail Woolley. Carolyn, I'm planning to do an oral interview with, or have somebody else do it. So her information is a little more sketch. And I hopefully we're all really aware of Steve Steiger and how long he's been holding us up. So I still feel really comfortable that this is a really solid place for us to start. And I also feel, because it's not going to be our traditional format, we're not literally setting a precedent. I feel like we have some leeway here to be a little looser and to make a few mistakes. And I still think that barging ahead is the best course.
And it seems like we're kind of at a pause here with this. I agree. I don't think there is consensus. And so I don't know if we, are inclined to re-agendize this, or.
I think it needs to be re-agendized. I think the actions that I recorded were propose some amended language of the bylaws, recalculate for possibly starting in 2026, and examining and working with city planners, examining resources with the city planners to see what resources are available. And it sounds like we can propose the people of preservation in addition to projects. I think that is an ongoing discussion, but because it is an ongoing discussion, we don't have consensus to do this in 2026. I'm sorry, 2025.
So I just want to mention, I really appreciate all the work your subcommittee's done on this item. And, I hope us wanting to really think about this more sort of as a collective board doesn't discourage the momentum and the effort that you guys have put forward. And really, it's made me very inspired to, put the same amount of focus and the same amount of work into the goal that I'm coming away with. Thank you.
Just related to this topic, when we think about like categories for the awards, something I'm interested in is like a small project. Oftentimes we're recognizing, big whole house remodels or huge renovations of commercial spaces. But, small projects can be really impactful and or really destructive for historic resources. So I think to acknowledge a project, whether that's by like assessed value budget or, like square footage or whatever, but that's smaller in nature could be a nice thing to recognize. So.
I like that. I just wonder how you identify them.
Yeah, I made project value, square footage impacted. Probably have suggestions for what makes something a small
No,
project.
but it's really a nice idea.
Is there anything else on this topic? I do, want to echo the thanks to the subcommittee for their work on this. I know we're going to come up with something really good. And I am really looking forward to it. I think it's something Palo Alto needs. So, thank you. Is there anything else before we move on to the meeting minutes? No? Okay. Then let's move on to the approval of the meeting minutes for the November 14th, 2024 meeting. Do we have public comment on the meeting minutes?
I have no comment.
Okay. Do we have any board comment? Oh, okay. Then I move to approve the minutes from the November 14th, 2024 meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, and we're all here so we can voice vote this. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
And for the record, that passes unanimously.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I almost got it. Yes, for the record, that passes unanimously. Okay. Is there anything else in the way of announcements?
I have two
Okay.
quick announcements. Caroline and I did tour the museum in early December. It's looking great, super excited. The museum governing body has taken ownership of it. It is not open. They are TBD pending an executive director who can then curate exhibits. But moving right along, very exciting. My second announcement is that you may have heard of the Menlo Forward group. They are a group of community housing advocates in Menlo Park, and they are having a joint Palo Alto Menlo Park community meeting on February 22nd. I believe it's at 4 p.m. I forgot the flyer. I will send it to Steven so he may distribute it. about the project at 80 Willow Road that is at Willow and Middlefield, just over the border in Palo Alto at the former Sunset Magazine headquarters. For those interested, I am happy to elaborate, but the group is sensible housing advocates that are advocating for what they believe makes sense for Menlo Park and Palo Alto. And the building at 80 Willow, the Sunset Building, has been nominated as a state historic landmark, and that is going to the state commission. It was re-agendized for May, I believe. So interesting project to follow along, menloforward.org. You can sign up for their updates and a yard sign if you feel compelled.
Thank you. Other announcements?
I just wanted to say to anybody who's out there that passes in this lovely book that Bo Crane did before his untimely death. And it's different walking tours through Palo Alto and lots of pictures and historic ads and this, that, and the other thing. It's kind of chatty. So Alyssa's, Fearless Chair is mentioned in the book. And I think that it's a really lovely thing. They are trying to figure out how to sell it. I think it'll be at Bell's before long. They're a little hesitant to run a big line of them. So they're only publishing like 20 at a time. I wish we had the funds to support them in that. I think it would be lovely, but those might be my funds instead of city funds. But I would encourage you all when it does come out to get a copy because it's really a nice little, read a little bit here, a little bit there, intro to Palo Alto.
Any other items? Okay. Well, I move to adjourn.
A second.
Right. All in favor, I guess? Aye.
Aye.
It
Thank
passes
you.
unanimously. Thank you.